Hello, good afternoon, morning, and/or evening, depending upon time zone, people of the internet. Welcome to Neon Lights Roleplay. More specifically, welcome to TPK Con, where I, and more specifically, we are hosting this super amazing panel where we're going to talk through some very important themes around restorative and actuative justice in your TTRPG and where you can find it. I have scoured the internet far and wide with the help of my compatriots to find 4 incredibly talented minds, world builders, story crafters, and creative minds, all who have some thoughts and the spiciest of takes. I've told them to spare no expense to throw all the habanero chili pepper into their takes today. And so what we're going to do is go around the horn and let everybody just say who they are, where people can find you, and just some stuff you do, whether it's here or anywhere else on the internet. And I'll come back in for the sort of roundabout, and we'll start talking about what we're doing here, huh? Take it away.
Good. Yeah. Hi, my name's Tate Washburn. I do a lot of stuff on this channel. I run the Cyberpunk game that's every other Sunday. I'm in the Seven Suns campaign that's going on tomorrow. But yeah, you can mostly find me at that's wrong. The on screen it's at @kinda_writing, but we'll fix that later. It's fine.
Did I do that? That actually might be a mistake on my part, by the way.
That's fine. But yeah, that's about it.
Ooh, TPK Con is rating with a party of 22.
Hi, friends!
Wow.
We made it! Hi, everybody!
You're just in time for my intro. Hello.
Exactly. Perfect timing.
I'm
Take it away,
Alicia.
Laura.
You can also find me at NNG98 on Twitch, and I'm mostly a player in various games. I've done a little bit of GMing. And yeah, you can find me on various places on Twitch between VODs and current streams and whatnot. But yeah, that's me. Also puns.
Puns. I think it's Vince next.
Vince, go.
You're fine.
Hello. I am Vince, aka Dichotomous Prime. I am a West Indian by tabletop game creator and streamer. You can find me over at twitch.tv/Dichotomous Prime and at the Twitter handle of the same @. I talk design kind of like right at the corner of design and justice and how the two interact, as well as narrative design, both in terms of video games and tabletop. You can typically find me pissing someone off on Twitter, usually someone who has a check mark.
Yeah. Geekum.
And I guess it's me. Hi.
Yeah, of course.
I'm Michelle. I occasionally GM for these guys over here on Neon Lights Roleplay. They usually, I'm usually a player actually, but you know, I dabble in GMing. I don't actually social media, and most of these people will probably tell you that I live under a rock, so I'm sorry, but hopefully I can bring an interesting perspective to this conversation here.
All the better for it. We envy your ability to avoid social media so much. Honestly, it's a rewarding trait. Well, nothing left to said. I am your host, your master of ceremony, your Sherpa, rather, maybe possibly for the evening or morning, depending on where you are. You can call me Young Foxy. Just Foxy's fine. You can find me on the internet now, actually, at big_Foxy, not Young Foxy anymore, because Twitter sucks and I got permabanned, so I made a new account. But that's not important, because here to talk about some more important things. So, I am creative director here. I do most of a lot of organizing. I do some GMing here. I run Seven Suns in his divine name. I also play in the Cyberpunk campaign and then some other stuff around here. I'm over on TPK Roleplay and playing in some campaigns with them. And I'm mostly just around hanging out on the internet, goofing off and making music when I want to. But today, we're going to talk about some pretty important theming here. And I'm going to bring you guys in with just some introductory talk. I'll start and sort of like preface each topic with some cursory thoughts of my own. And then I want you guys to just sort of take it on your own and just like have this, the floor to yourselves. And I'll butt in here or there when I feel like I want to add a thing on spot here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just restorative justice. So, as defined dictionarily, restorative justice refers to justice which reflects positively upon the community. Effectively, it seeks to undo the harm crime causes. What that means is, in an interpersonal sense, crime is not just it's not a victimless sense. Crime is never victimless. So there's always a damage caused, but through criminality. In a systemic sense, however, systemic restorative justice, which is the thing we're talking about here, in a systemic sense, refers to the ways in which systems which perpetuate criminality punish that same criminality. And we see that a lot of examples of that in our real world, wherein systems of violence or systems of oppression uphold certain oppressive standards and thus perpetuate certain negative outcomes that are based on those existing settings and standards. You can look at race, you can look at gender, you can look at all kinds of different dynamics like that. So when we talk about this in terms of TTRPGs, it's important to remember that the ultimate goal of any campaign, and this is an opinion piece here, obviously setting off, is to tell a story. Everyone, player, GM, whatever side here, is to tell a story. You're collaboratively telling a story here. Stories always reflect reality. There's always a real life mirror you can hold up to any story, no matter what you're looking at, the deepest fantasy, the hardest sci-fi. There's always a place you can find that, right? So in that, I think that there is always an important level to consider the ways in which the themes we include into our campaigns reflect real life problems, real life issues that real life people and real life communities face. Having said that, my sort of opening question for you to the panel is: in which ways do you what do you do when you find that happening? When you're telling a story, when you're writing a campaign or a story, and you find yourself tripping across what might be a real life problem for a player or for a community, what reactions come to you immediately? What things do you do? What steps do you take there? And why, I guess? Do you find yourself shying away from them? Do you find yourself wanting to indulge that? Is that an immediate player conversation you want to have? What steps do you take there, just like immediately when that first happens? And I'm gonna call on. We'll start with Tate for this one. Actually, go for it.
Okay, yeah. So generally, when I'm trying to make a campaign, I'm trying not to plan it out so far in advance that I can't make adjustments. And so generally, I guess it depends on the topic that's coming up, like what restorative justice type issue is happening. Because if it's something that I know my players might not agree with, or they might not, maybe agree isn't the right word, something they don't want to play, I'm really going to have that conversation pretty early on. So I think my first reaction is, okay, who do I talk to first and why? Whether it's they've selected something on a consent form of like, hey, I didn't want to have a game about this, and that's like pretty central to the theme that's sort of popping up. Or if it's more general, like I just know that they're like, oh, this is something they're very passionate about. And it's not necessarily to say I will include it or won't include it, more of I should talk to some of the players as to how it's going to happen, especially because they're generally a very sensitive subject.
That's an important thing to think about. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about like conversation here.
Yeah.
We'll have a lot of talk about like, talking to your players and talking to your party about like when these lines get tripped, what they do. But curious to hear other thoughts here. Like, what are other things you do when you encounter sort of certain? I'll even, if it's comfortable, I can even sort of like give a mock scenario if it makes people feel a little more comfortable here.
Mm-hmm.
Just an easy one. Let's say, for example, just you're playing core D&D as typical, rules as intended D&D, and setting as intended. Certain species, like say tieflings, certain cultures are treated as an underclass. They're kind of, for whatever reason, whether it's heritage, history, or whatever, they are treated as separate by larger society. And let's say you have a player who, in their campaign, jumps in and says, "I want to be a tiefling. I think the whole demon horns, demonic ancestry thing is super cool." And you say, "Okay, well, tieflings are kind of treated a little bit, maybe sort of kind of racist in this setting." And maybe your player here is obviously a rather obvious racial minority. What's your first call when you encounter that scenario? And I know I'm asking like a very loaded question up front here, but I promise it'll lead to some important discussion here. So I'm sorry for making this like so upfront here.
No problem. I can take the next shot of this because
Please,
I was actually in a campaign where basically the scenario you're talking about was played out. Essentially, I, as a visible minority, was playing another visible minority in a game. And I made sure I talked to the person who I wasn't running the game. I was a player. I made sure to talk ahead of time, just like because they made sure to tell me like, hey, there's going to be some heavy stuff in here. If it gets past a certain point, I'll always check in with you before we get to a major bit. But it's just like, okay, if you're going to do this, there's a whole kind of thing like where like no, it's not going to be the racism light, let's say. Like, no, we're gonna go kind of like word for word for some real life examples. No slurs we use, just so we're clear on that. But you get what I mean. So yeah, so I made sure, and I'm just like, yep, nope, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with that. So it's definitely a matter of comfort level. But yeah, it's always just a check in. Like, okay, you're okay with this, but make sure you have checkpoint check-ins. It's not just I'm okay with role playing racism. You have the conversation once and then never again. Like, no, you do continual check-ins. Always make sure it's okay.
Definitely,
you know,
absolutely. You have to play in. You have to make sure that's like again a constant check-in, a constant back and forth. It's a conversation. Yeah. It's not a one-time. Hey, can we do a racism? Yeah, sure, I guess. And then you just move on. You have to constantly keep checking in on those things to make sure. And
well, yeah, because someone who's okay with that. Yeah, someone who's okay with that at the beginning, they might be having a bad day one time you're doing a session and be like, I don't want to deal with that right now.
Exactly.
Like, can I not today? Yeah, not.
Which basically any real world issue can be that level, even if it's something that you think is small, but is for them could be big that day.
Exactly. Agree. Vince, Michelle, please, thoughts.
I mean, if you don't mind me going ahead, Vince.
Please go ahead.
So I guess one thing that I'd like to point out is, I guess, sugarcoating. Like, it's important, I think, also to talk with your players about, like, is it okay to be blunt about it, right? Like, some people don't like it when you're sugarcoating the issue, right? There's always like avoiding it, but like that, because sometimes it feels like you're avoiding the problem entirely, like not addressing it. There's no discussion about it, right? Like, and I think it's also like it's an important topic to bring up, right? If your players are uncomfortable with it, that's fine, right? If they don't want to do it, but like, there's like a fine line, I think, between like, I guess, whitewashing something and like, 100%. Or at least trying to like,
Absolutely. Yeah, some people may want pure escapism, and other people just like, no, I have the spoons to deal with this today. So let's go ahead this session. Let's go and do it.
Yeah, I want to hear Vince's thoughts, and then I actually want to come back on that because I have something a story I want to mention in regarding that. Only because the person who is relevant here, I know is in chat, so I want to mention it while I have them here. But take it away, Vince, please.
Yeah, so I think that having to do with that, one, from the outset of the campaign, more than kind of the consent checklist, because one of the things that we often talk about is that things like systemic oppression do not, by definition, occur in a vacuum. And so when I'm going in to start a campaign, whether it's a short-term campaign, longer campaign, that sort of thing, almost kind of like, in addition to the sort of consent checklist as people's personal boundaries, I also ask the table, what kind of story are we going to tell?
Right.
Because there's also things in terms of like, people might be shocked to know that a lot of the time my games involve a lot of shutting down corrupt governments and kind of dealing with all of that sort of stuff. And so those kinds of stories are empowering for like, or at least seek to empower people who are historically or within the setting downtrodden, and like they get to kind of have that experience of being like, yeah, fuck you, fascist government, and all of that sort of stuff. And kind of the grounding of things like, the certain canonical things like having to do with tieflings or orcs or any of those sorts of things. I start thinking about like, and for straight up, like, I've never used a canon Forgotten Realms setting or like anything like that. I start thinking about like, okay, but so then how do these, at least historically, I say historically, in D&D, these sorts of fantasy races, like, how are they going to be integrated into the setting more broadly? And like, are there going to be players who are playing orc characters, or are there going to be players who are going to be playing like any of these other different characters who have kind of been stereotyped, and kind of enmeshing those sorts of experiences into like how I'm going to create these experiences for these players of just kind of like, oh yeah, cool, we're going to walk into town and you might get some like fantasy slurs thrown at you. Is like, okay, but what's the purpose of me even doing that other than it fits in the setting? Which is like a flimsy justification for anything, specifically something that is like potentially thoroughly unpleasant. And so kind of when we're talking about getting the group together, the wants and needs of the players and GMs, and their desire of kind of like what kind of experience they're looking to have at the table overall. Those are kind of all those sorts of questions that I start to think about when I think about like these issues being whether or not they're going to be a large or smaller portion of our experience within a certain campaign, within the setting itself, and just even more broadly selecting settings like, you know, you, Fox, you gave the example of tieflings within like Forgotten Realms, and like having to go through with my like editor's pen and like go like, we're not going to do that. No. Anti-Semitic trope, not a fan. Like, is just why I'm just kind of like, and just like I'm just gonna throw that out and do something else, because just like the sheer amount of research that you have to be like, you know what, tis a silly place. I'm just gonna make one up and like kind of try and salvage something from it.
Yeah, so. And like jumping back on something like, because I think there's two great lines that are being drawn here. I think you're all kind of hitting on the idea of, first off, talk to your players, talk to your parties first and foremost before you do anything else. Like, hey, this story I'm telling, this thing we're hitting on, we're running up on some pretty serious systemic stuff we're talking about. Do we want to hit this, or are we sliding it? Because there's sort of two ways you can run this. I feel like we're hearing. There's the, if we're gonna do it, we'll do it. We're not gonna like Alicia said, we're not gonna racism light today. We're not gonna get like the vague like, hey, other you, and then like you walk away and that's it. No, if we're doing this, then we're attacking it, we're doing it. Or there's the other way where you can say like, listen, this is not the world we're telling you today. This is not what we're here for today at all. We're just not doing that. And I think Michelle talks about not whitewashing, not ignoring, not just creating a world, because again, all stories have real inspiration. All stories take things from you can hold any story up to a mirror and find some part of reality, right? You can't do that and then say, oh well, we'll just ignore the parts that were bad because we don't want to talk about them. We'll just racism didn't happen here, whatever. It's the old West, but we didn't genocide natives. Whatever. No, you can't do that. You can't. It's not fair, right? So, but a great example of handling that with efficacy and honesty for your players, and I'm going to shout him out, if hoping he's still in chat here. Cole from TPK, who was running, and even though it's on hiatus right now, the Sherlock Investigations rotating one-shot campaign, which takes place in an alternate world Victorian London with magic, which, of course, like one of the things that came up when I joined that campaign and hopped into that campaign, every character I make is as dark-skinned as me. I always play characters that are my skin tone. That's how I roll. I play me in every campaign that I'm in. So when I'm playing a black orphan kid in London, I kind of got to ask, like, hey, so is this London, or? And Cole
year in London,
where he basically told me, like, listen, the world we're building here is not our London. This is a world where everyone here got along. There is not this like, there are instances of people being oppressive or rude or mean, but the society here is much different. And he established that early in saying, like, listen. Don't be afraid. We're not telling that story here. So like, that was great for me to get that up front before I even made my character. That was great because that made me say like, all right, if I want to build a character who wants to attack those things, if I want to build a character that gets to attack the racist tropes and things like that, I know this isn't the campaign for that. I can do that in some other world. But also, if I know, if I go into this campaign afraid that I'm going to build a tiefling or an orc or a black person, and then my DM's going to be like, oh yeah, you walk into this town and the tavern keeper calls you a whatever, like, I don't have to have that fear because from before session 0, even my DM tells me, hey, listen, we're not doing that. That's not happening. And that's not whitewashing. That's telling your party ahead of time, we're not telling that story. That's not what we're here for. And I think that's a bit more than just like corrective. That's, dare I say, restorative. And that's kind of like, again, centering in on like what we're talking about here. The center point of this here is like, if you're going to attack those themes, attack them earnestly, either from inception or in concept when building your world. And I think that's a great way for us to kind of like segue around into our sort of second point. Great timing on that, like 20 minutes in. Good job, guys. Made it. So, which I think is a great segue. my second point is around designing a campaign, building a group, and consent. So I'm going to sort of like talk about what those mean relevant to what we're talking about here, and then just like, again, open it up to you. Feel free to talk about them in general as well if you want. That's totally fine. They're super important points to mention, so feel free to lay them out here. I'm just here to kind of facilitate here. So I'm just going to use a personal example here since it's happening tomorrow. Seven Sons is a campaign that I'm running right now. It's D&D 5th edition. It's entirely homebrew. I am not using any officially written material for that. It's all my brain parts and whatever I can come up with. It is a world that is inundated with inequality. It is a world built on its authoritativeness naturally. And my players have been presented with this from the jump. I was like, all right, you guys are seeing this. There are slaves here. There's a lot of inequality. Some people live opulently. Some live like shit. They see that from day one, from phase one. And hell, even before we even had session 0, I told them, like, listen, guys, this campaign's going to have these things for the purposes of them knowing, like, if you want to attack these dynamics, if you want to build a character that essentially says, I hate these things and my character goal is to destroy them, I am giving you them specifically so you can do that. I'm not putting racism in my campaign just so we can all go, wow, this really sucks. Okay, moving on. No, if we're going to put it in there, to quote myself for a bit, which is weird to do, I make my campaign so that no matter what world I'm building, my friends can punch Nazis. It's as simple as that. I don't care if we're in the deserts of Zora, the far reaches of some other planet, or another universe entirely. Principle. There are going to be fascists, and you can punch them. That's the point. So that's all I want to say about sort of that first part. You guys all take it.
Is it all right if I jump in? Okay.
Please, yeah, Vince, take it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So kind of on the level of designing a campaign / world, I almost want to kind of like fold those things in and go like one step broader and kind of like thinking about under these sorts of design things, even beyond kind of the lore of the world, there are certain tropes within the actual design, like the nitty gritty, like the numbers of the game and that sort of thing, and how much text in whatever system you're using is devoted to dealing with problems in X, Y, or Z sort of way. And like those sorts of things, I feel like, and this is kind of the thing that I tend to come to a head with D&D people having to do with, is the fact that like 70% of the book it involves solving problems with violence, and in particular a sort of violence that is very sort of you wander around the countryside, stealing things from like former like sacred tombs. Basically, you grave rob. You do the exact same thing that like Britain did to like Egypt and everywhere. Not even just, it would be easier to choose the number of countries they didn't do that to. But basically, even if it's kind of like outside of those settings, like I remember for about 2 or 3 years, I was a pro GM, and the number of times that even when I started kind of thinking about like, there were players who liked a good dungeon crawl, and it was just like, okay, cool, that's awesome. And then I started kind of looking into what a dungeon is, and kind of the idea of like even the most kind of broad sort of definition of it is a lot of the time the way that the ones that were designed, because like I didn't get paid enough to design dungeons from scratch every week for those sorts of things. So I would use things from Out of the Abyss or Princes of the Apocalypse were kind of the two big ones that I ran. And so much of the time it was just kind of like, well, okay, your ability to kind of like gauge power is your ability to do violence to people. Like as you level, that is your definition of getting more powerful. Is it's just like you do however much damage. If you look at the magic spells, like it's kind of bereft of context. It's like, okay, so this one's for flaying someone's skin, this one's for disintegrating people, this one's for burning people alive, this one's for like burying them under the earth, this one's, and it's just like you okay? Wizards of the Coast, are you okay? Like they're not, by the way. But there's
like not in the slightest. They're very far from okay.
But my point, to not get too far off on a tangent, is that like the tools mechanically that you choose matter, because even if you want to sort of subvert a lot of these tropes within the game with your lore and with the structure of your quests and everything, it is very hard to do that without going like, well, okay, we don't have to use that and we can use this, and we don't have to use that and you can use this, and you can do that. But is everyone here familiar with the term ship of Theseus problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I will. Okay. I'll give it a quick sort of summary for both Michelle and for the folks in chat who may not be so familiar. The idea of a ship of Theseus is essentially the idea that if you replace a ship like one board at a time, and just kind of like, part of it breaks, you need to repair it, so you replace it with something else. Eventually, you have a whole new ship. And I kind of was thinking about this today, about like how folks are like, well, okay, we can write like a Ghibli campaign, like for D&D. And I was like, well, okay, but it's mostly all of the stuff that I referenced. And they're like, well, we don't have to use all of that sort of stuff. And I kind of went like, well, okay, then what's left?
Exactly.
And like, you can do that, but then my next question would be like, okay, but why did you spend the amount of effort that you did to kind of like play within this? Whereas you could instead take the few things that do apply to that and homebrew it into a system that is much more conducive to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And like that same subverting those tropes is what I'm putting into the superhero game that I'm building. That's called Momentous. Because those of you might be shocked to know, probably not if you've ever seen my Twitter timeline, I'm a huge fan of My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia has a ton of like propaganda and fashy shit in it. Like Korikoshi's politics are awful. And so basically the thing that I decided was that when I started making that game, there are going to be no easy hero beatdowns involving a dude in a balaclava with a bag that has a dollar sign on it running out of a bag. And so it's just like, no, you are going to punch cops before you punch bank robbers in my game. I guarantee you that. And looking at the amount of like superhero media, that actually took a lot of doing to find something where like jail, the carceral state, or just like criminals just kind of being bad enough that you have to kill them, or superheroes just being cops with powers, wasn't there. Ultimately, to wrap up this point, because I know that I'm kind of going a little bit long and I want to give everyone else a chance to talk, the tools that you choose matter mechanically. As much as we have kind of gotten used to the idea of homebrewing, swapping rules out, all of that stuff matters. But the structure and the infrastructure and the skeleton upon which the rest of your game is supported will shape player experiences and incentivize or disincentivize certain kinds of choices. And if there's a specific kind of story you're wanting to tell, you will have a much easier or harder time depending on how conducive the rule set that you use is.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Very, very insightful thought, Vince. Very, very good things to say. I want to make sure I grab everyone else's thoughts on this, because I feel like we all have some very burning things to say on this. So I want to make sure I grab everybody on this. So please take it away, my loves.
I could speak to the end of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely the tools you give someone sort of creates the problems that they want to solve. And I honestly, I've never used a standard D&D setting for that reason, but also just when we started this channel and we started playing Cyberpunk Red was the first game we streamed. That was the very first time I'd ran that. And actually, it's just, even as a game that is still kind of heavy on violence, just the nature of both how easy it is to do, how dangerous it is, and just the balancing of it differently. That there's, at least compared to something like D&D, way less of it is about how do I hurt someone. A lot more of it is navigating a digital landscape, or navigating technology, or navigating your own attachments and the city. And in that way, it's sort of naturally built a very different kind of campaign than anything I've run in a classic dungeon crawler. And like Vince, I'm also trying to make a game that doesn't necessarily rely on violence, but that's a whole long topic that I'm sure we could go on forever.
And I mean, to give you credit as a player in that campaign, Tate, I think one great credit to you is that I have built a character who's shitty mouth and that attitude should get him in fights constantly. And we've only been in combat of our how many sessions are we in now? Like 13, maybe?
13, 14, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Fox has been in a shootout maybe twice in the whole campaign, like 2 or 3 times maybe total. And like a good number of them he started. Like you know, like I think that's a good testament to you of like a system like Cyberpunk where in like it's so easy to take that and just go like, all right, just give them bad guys to shoot up and problems to solve and stuff to steal and that's it. Like you could easily just run that. For you to have taken that and built a story, a campaign where even characters like ours who are gritty, products of this world and are just as jaded and violence hungry as anyone else in this world would be by a product of what this world is, the story you have us telling still lets us go beyond that, which I think is like that first major step you take in talking about like justice that's beyond just like, oh, hey, here's the bad guy, you beat him, you win. Like attacking a system and like systemic justice in your campaign in that manner is like not so much just saying like, oh, you made the whole system better, it's all sunshine and rainbows, but saying no. Even in the midst of this shit, even in this grit and muck, there are ways you can rise above that. There are things that are beyond that. There are better things here if you fight for them and find them. And I think that's a great like motive you push forward here, you know?
And I think to Vince's point, it's because this system is better at that than a classic D&D game. There's a lot more social interaction. There's a lot more ways you can subtly change the way you talk to people or build things or how you distribute resources. It's much better at resources, like a lot better.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually I'm going to come back on that talking about D&D in a little bit, but I want to hear our two other thoughts here because I see them cooking and I want to start chefing it up on me. So Alicia, Michelle, hit me up. Give me a plate. You mean?
So for me, I do sort of read like it is inherently like D&D, talking D&D specifically. It's just like it's very easy to be just like, oh, this is just how. It's like there's lots of ways for you to hurt people and everything. But I also do feel that it's sort of like I very much approve of systems where it's just like we're gonna focus on ways to not necessarily take it to violence, and I think that's very important to have. I also think there's a level of realism in D&D with the fact that like most times, especially with how our society like conditions and everything, like violence is your first answer. There's a reason why we see violence so much more in our media than like more romantic or more intimate things. So as a so sometimes as a player, it can I know, like I'd say, let's say 64% of the time, I try and make sure I play a character who's more just like, I'm going to find a way to avoid it. Just like violence will come there will be times violence will come at you and you do not have a choice about it. So at that point, it's about like, how do I get around this? How do I creatively get around this? Because again, depending on how you move in life, you're going to have to do that a lot. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to do that. Let me be very clear about that. I'd much rather that not be the answer. But, there's a certain amount of like being in a more controlled environment where you can more creatively get around it. Like, okay, there's no real world consequences to me trying this thing to get around this combat, let's say. Yeah. Whereas opposed to in life, you make the right decision and there are consequences. Very real, very immediate. So there's a certain amount of it can be almost sort of cathartic to be just like, I don't have to use your violence. Yes, could I take Disintegrate? I could, but I'm going to take Shillelagh for a 6th time instead. Yeah, suck it, Watsky.
Shillelagh again. Motherfucker. Try it.
I do like that, though. Like, I do think there is some very much a value of a more violent system, but giving players tools to circumvent it. That feels like restorative justice to me of like, no, we're using a system because that's the story I want to tell.
Yeah.
Actually, I think in that case, very much pick it.
I think the first game I ever played with you was, I'm pretty sure it was a one-shot with Valor, right? And I think that was when I had played Nakiue for the first time, and you played, I can't remember, you were the Ranger, I remember the Goliath Ranger, and you didn't attack an enemy ever for the whole one-shot.
Yeah,
and
I was in that too, hold on.
Yeah, you were in that, I remember this, look at this! Look at that. Anyway, I remember that. Like, I remember that moment of like, I'm playing this character literally inundated with violence, whose default solution to anything is, can I bite its head off? Like, by default. And like, I saw those as like two great sort of mirror examples talking about the sort of two ways to handle like actuating justice in your world. Sort of like that, like embracing that, like, that rejection of it or that firm denial of it, where it's like, I built Nakiue as a challenge to authority, where it's like someone who has experienced, unfairness, inequality, slavery, and thus violently fights against it. Whereas you're a character who, like, violently, like, almost like you're violently pacifist. You deliberately refuse that system. You deliberately say, I won't engage that, which is like,
more people had to make snack rolls to make sure they're secure, we'd be happier because everybody
exactly.
would be fed.
And I think that's like, it's a great, not just.
I'll pretend I said Goodberry, not
like,
Shillelagh, because I realized that was plus damage. Pretend I said Goodberry. Edit the VOD. We're good.
It's fine.
Edit the VOD. We'll fix it in post. Don't worry. No, but like, it's a great, like, as someone who has GM'd for you with a character like that, it's not only a great challenge to like the story itself to a degree, where it's like you're a character who kind of like, again, very, very stagnantly opposes all these violent institutions without violence, which is it's powerful, but it's also a metacon sort of like challenge to like the systems and the stories these games represent. Like D&D, and again, the Starfinder is a mirror of Pathfinder, which is a mirror of D&D. Those games are made to be combat sims. Like, you're made to just get in, blast the bad guys, get the loot, and get out. That's it.
And that's fine. So, that's the game you're playing. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, to have a game where a character who are like literally you are going out of your way, again, almost violently taking the rules in your hands to say, no, I'm not doing that. That is the kind, like, that's the kind of justice I mean when I say, like, that's not just justice in terms of like making a stand. It's justice in terms of the way it speaks to undo harm, right? And that's, I think, is like the larger point of justice being restorative. It's not just justice that fixes the problem, it's justice that undoes the harm, which I think is the larger point here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've been letting her cook for too long. I need to hear Michelle's thoughts on this question.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a different take on this, I guess.
Please.
So okay, well, because I want to talk about like consent, because I know okay, so I haven't been GMing very long. I think my last one shot was like basically my third GM'd one shot, but one of the things that I think we really made sure to do was that the whole group got together and we talked about our consent forms. And part of it was like, okay, well, yes, we may or may not have like actually filled out the actual consent form like before the actual thing started, but having everyone sit in a table, right, or in the call and just like say like, hey, we're okay with this or we're not okay with this, I think was a really good thing to do, because then one, right, like everyone knows, hey, yes, like if this shows up, we are going to, have a talk about it, or we're going to check in with everybody else, right? Like, say this is like, it's good that I think, and part of it's also like having a good player base, right? People who are comfortable with saying like, hey, I'm okay with talking to, like, say you, Tate, about like this topic, right? Or like, I feel comfortable if maybe like if I'm not comfortable with talking directly DMing someone or like GMing someone, I can feel comfortable just like saying like, hey, can you like check in with this person, right? Like, I think having consent conversations as a group, right? Also because it's not like a one-to-one kind of like, oh, right, like if I don't agree with this one thing, then I'm like, letting down my GM, right? Or something. It's more of like a, hey, can we all collectively agree that this is what we're okay and not okay with?
And I think it was I kind of following up again as someone who's in that, I loved kind of like, as opposed to just like, let me check off some things on a consent list and then send it to my GM. I kind of love the more interpersonal, like, hey, group, let's sit down and talk over these things. What's okay, what's not? Because, like, I don't know, there's a lot of nuance there. Like, it's not just like, hey, I don't want to see this thing in this game at all, which that can be a fine, hard line for people. But, like, sometimes the why can be critical for that. Like, I don't want to see this form of oppression in my campaign because it reflects things that I'm dealing with in real life. Well, that might be a thing where the group says, okay, well, would you be okay with us putting this in so we can all fight it with you? Would you want that? Like, if you are dealing with, I don't know, if you're dealing with some shitty transphobe coworker, do you want a story where some shitty king misgendered you and then we literally stab him in the gut and he dies and we figure out what happens from there? Like, do you want that? Like that's what and like that's the kind of thing where like, you can talk about that. Like that sheet's more important than just saying like, hey, check off things you don't want to see or things you might want to see, and then I'll figure it out from there. Because that feels like it's too it's too much. It makes your DM too much like a teacher, where I'm like, I gotta figure out the right rule set for everybody else and just like present it to them. Whereas we could just talk about it like a group of friends, because that's what we're supposed to be at the end of the day. A group of friends at a table playing a game, telling a story, right? Like, so yeah, I like Michelle, I think you handled that efficaciously. And like part of it was like you said, like people just hadn't filled out the sheet in time. But I think the way you handle that is the way that I think we should handle that going forward as an org. Just like, as opposed to doing this like turn in your sheet nonsense, let's just all group up and talk through it. Let's figure out what makes the most sense for us. Like, you know? And like, because I think that works well on that. You can even find lines where it's like someone could say, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable explaining why, but I don't want to see this in this in this campaign. That's a great line of the where everyone says, okay, cool, that's that player's hard line. So now I know, not even as a GM, I know as a player, I shouldn't even touch that in my backstory or in things that I talk about or any of that. Like, you know, like those, like even those hard lines, which they can be difficult conversations to have, they're important. Which I think is, again, you guys are killing it with the timing. A super awesome segue. Unless any final parting thoughts here before we segue to the next question. I don't want to take away from anybody.
A quick thought, because I wanted to kind of bounce off of Alicia's point to say that I wanted to make sure that folks know I'm not opposed to the idea of like violence in TTRPGs, and I even think that it could be restorative in terms of like taking down like people who happen to be, like, you know, tearing down the thrones of the oppressors and things like that. I think more my point with kind of the, you know, and I'll pick on D&D, but we can also say like Warhammer 40K for the sake of variety.
Talk about it.
Yeah, is more. I would like if I had, you know, a wish other than well, okay, yeah, we go like Hasbro billion-dollar corporation. We'll save that wish for like down the road. But the wish that I would have for like the use of violence in TTRPGs is not necessarily like, you know, no violence, no violence bad, can't do that. But more, I would like more mindfulness about like who are the ones who are going to get punched. Just because of like, you know, and this kind of leans more into kind of like the canon setting sort of thing, but like, you know, you're making a basic combat encounter for level 3 party members, and like who's your typical like sack of hit points to kill?
Right.
It's usually bandits, right? It's bandits, or it's a tribe of savage orcs who have just decided to like take your stuff because that's what orcs do, and that sort of thing. And so I think that like one of my favorite games that I am like tooting the horn of right now is Tidebreaker, because of the amount of work that Nick has put in being like, these have historically not been these have historically been portrayed as the bad guys, you know, criminals, and like, you know, it's a homeless person. Oh, look out, he's got a whiskey bottle, like, or something like that. And all of these sorts of things, and just kind of like, you know, oh, they fight to the death, and just kind of like, if you try and trust them, they'll try and betray you. And it's the whole like weird Smeagol Gollum thing where like, oh, well, you can't really restore them. Or the number of times that I see the statement, fights until slain cannot be reasoned with in like a D&D book, really frustrates me. And so I think that I'm all about kicking evil in the dick, but I am real big on like, okay, under the consent conversation and under the world building conversation, who are we deciding like who needs to get like their grundle smashed in by my foot? Like, who's that person? And like subverting that to be to kind of get rid of this whole thing of just kind of like, oh, it's the poor bandits on the side of the road who like are probably starving and their knife sucks and that's why they're robbing you, and like all of that sort of thing. But yeah, no, that's very much not necessarily anti-violent, but more pro dialogue, which is kind of what Michelle was bringing up anyway. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on that.
And I like, it's a thing I talk about like all the time with players, especially when I play with new D&Ders or new tabletop RPG players. Just like, think of this seriously. Like, not every fight has to be go in swinging until everything's dead. if the person you're fighting stops and drops their sword and holds their hands up, would you just cut them in half in real life? Like, come on. And like, if that's the character you're playing, if that's the the character you're playing is just uncompromising, no mercy, no remorse. Okay, fine, play that. But like, understand that this world is real, and the things you encounter are real, and the people you encounter are real.
There will be consequences.
I hate to use the term monsters. I hate it. I hate it. D&D calls it the monster manual, and it includes like things like bandits and like sentient species. It shouldn't be called the monster manual because why is sentient
I didn't
things
even
just
think about that. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, and we could derail for half an hour about that. I'm perfectly sure. So I'll hold that one back in favor of an example actually. Just to call out more people who I love, who I think are doing great things. I am currently running. Pretty soon, it'll be the only TPK game I'm in. Cold Hands, Warm Hearts is a Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign I'm a part of over on TPK Roleplay. I'm playing. My character is a Warforged who is a relic of an ancient war. He's like 450 years old, literal a giant war bot. All he ever knows is known as how to fight stuff. He's kind of trying to figure out the whole being a person thing. And our last session, there was this incredible moment where my character had like an Iron Giant Bambi moment with some deer, which is great. And then after that, we get to Stone Talon Sanctuary, and we meet these like Goliaths there, and we like walk through their wall of histories and talk with them and drink with them and eat and have a strongman competition. And like the session ends with us kind of like, knowing what we have to go do to help them out, but like it kind of just ends there. And in the post-game chat, our DM tells us, hey, this was built to be a dungeon crawl. You're supposed to walk through and fight all these Goliaths. And like, I was like, why? Like, our introduction to them is like us walking across them randomly across like the ice one day, and they're like, hey, if you ever like happen to pass us, we're over at this place over here. Why would we pull up and want to fight them? What? Why can't they just be our friends? And so like, shout out to
Wizards of the Coast
Hero over on TPK Roleplay, who is again just a super incredible, amazing GM. I super adore everything he's doing with that. But that's an example of like someone literally taking a pre-written adventure, but putting the work in to say, no, this isn't right or fair. My players have put in the work to build characters who have depth and meaning and care and feeling beyond just walk around and kill everybody. So I'm going to give them stuff to do besides just walking around and killing everybody, which for us as players felt restorative. It felt necessary to be playing a literal giant murder bot and be able to walk into a cavern full of people and hang out and goof off of them and compete in a goofy like rock lifting competition, and then to be afterwards told like, hey, by the way, book is written, you're supposed to walk in there and kill all of them. Like, being told something about being told like, hey, book is written, it's supposed to be dungeon crawl, made me as a player feel better about the fact that we didn't. Like, I felt good knowing that we were supposed to have walked in there and fought all those Goliaths, but we didn't. We just solved that through like just empathy and being a good person, and also liking to drink a lot, which, I mean, come on, who doesn't like a good drink? But I want to posit this just as one last thing before we go on a break. It's sort of like a sub question separate from any of our main points. I'll rapid fire thoughts on this, and then we'll head off to our break real quick. What are some sort of strategies you take when it comes to chatting with your players? What are some, and if you want, you can go with like strategies here, or like an example you want to give, like specifically like, I did this to make my player comfortable. Just like, where do you do that? And I think it'll help us lens like going forward for the conversation when we come back from break. I'll give an example here. Seven Sons, a campaign that I'm running again right now. One of the first major enemies my party met was the emir of a city. His name was Salim Al-Daraisi, and he was just the dickiest of dick bags ever. Just your typical like opulent noble, wants whatever he sees, takes whatever he wants, and just I wrote him as the shittiest person ever, to the point where like, as I was writing like the encounter when the party gets like captured and brought to him, I was like, I really want to bring home just how smarmy he is. And I was like, do I want to have him like creepy flirt with one of them? And I was like, okay, I could just drop this on one of my players. I could just have it happen in session and just like, let's see them react to it live, and I could just deal with that. But I found it much more safe and comforting to contact my player, the person who I decided, all right, he's going to pick your character to flirt with, to contact that player and say, hey, listen, you're going to meet an NPC next session who's going to be a total shithead to your character. Are you okay with that? Because if not, I want to know now so I can rewrite it. Like, and not only was that great because I got to like have that moment where sure I felt horrible RPing it, but like my players got that moment of like having that happen, but I never felt afraid in any moment. In the moments where it was happening back and forth, I never felt like there was no limit I could cross. I could dive fully into the shitty character because I'd already talked to my player and established where the line was. And then further, 7 or 8 sessions going forward, when he comes back in as sort of like a recurring villain and they're like ruining his slave market, I'm like writing that session, I have to stop halfway through and go, they might just kill him. And I could, as a GM, write some plot armory reason why he can't die here. Have him surrounded by bodyguards, have him have some magic barrier, because I care about the story and he needs to be important there. Or I can recognize that I've touched upon a very serious thing that my character and more importantly, my players deal with, which is sexual harassment and sexual violence on behalf of shitty men. I can recognize that they are encountering that real thing, and that I've given them a chance to fight against that, to literally put their teeth in it, and I can give them that. My story be damned. So yeah, they fucking put a hole in that guy. He's dead now. I have to figure out what happens to my story because of that. But I'm not going to deny my players the ability to do that if I'm going to set up that sort of trauma or that trouble there, you know? So I guess just like quick thoughts on like where do you think what do you tend to do when it comes to like finding those lines with your players? What are some strategies or some examples you've run across there? And it can be player side, GM side, outside opinion side. Just what do you want to hear? And I think let's kick in. Even though your experience might be limited, I still want to hear if you maybe have some thoughts on this. Let's start with Michelle here for this one.
Sure. I mean, okay, so I guess we'll use our last one shot for example. I think a lot of it is about, I guess, just same as you, Kit, like having conversation. I remember having just like as we were developing, like, you know, sort of like the mission plot line, like giving people like, you know, the choice of like, hey, what kind of mission do you want to go on, right? For context, this was a Naruto one shot where like you know, you had like a shinobi team who were basically going to pick a C rank and like go on a mission, right? So sorry, I don't remember contexts. Yeah. But so anyways, like there's a lot of conversation on like, hey, like what kind of mission do you guys feel comfortable going on, right? Like, and then talk on what do you guys want to see? Like what kind of opportunities do you want to have in this one shot, right? And then also like we had some conversation on like, hey, do you want like romance? Do you want to or do you want to like have like I guess like, you know, once again like the creepy flirty person, and you know there was like if that was a possibility, it was important that like, you know, I talked with, you know, the people, or at least to talk with the group, like, hey, like, are you okay with this? And with like, you know, with Fox, right, like we had, you know, like a whole like, what is it, like character romance development, like we had to like, it was important to make sure that it was like, hey, are you like, you want to see this happen, I got to make sure that this happens, right? Or you're not comfortable with this, I got to make sure that this is like, you know, we nix this from the campaign. And I don't know, like I feel like it's just kind of common sense to like just, hey, have a talk with people before you put something into like that you think like even if it's something that you think is kind of like, I guess innocuous, it's still good to, you know, be like, hey, are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? Do you want this in here? Do you not want this in here?
Yeah. And I mean, just to follow up on that, and I'll use the example I was in because I can reference it. Like, for if anyone in like chat is like thinking like, oh, well, I'm a little afraid about like the moment or the RP. Like, if I spoil a thing for my players, like, will it come out right in the moment? I don't think it's a fear you should ever be afraid of, ever. And I can say that from both sides. From a GM side, just having players that you know like are good players and like can like care about their characters, their reactions in the moment will be based more on the moment than on any pretense or lead up. Even if they know what's about to happen, it's still like, again, I'm going to shout people out directly because this is what I'm doing all panel. Sir Heck was the person I talked to about with the shitty NPC and like the flirting thing. And even though we had said ahead of time, this NPC will be creepy and flirty to you, the interactions were still authentic and perfect and real, like for audience and even for me as a GM, because like there was that player realness. And speaking on the player side, talking to you, Michelle, with the Naruto one shot, and like my character's romance with the NPC, like even though we already established, okay, like yeah, the NPC and my character will probably have this like kind of flirty tsundere thing going on until the end of the one shot where they're kind of like they'll be like kind of cutie by the end. Like we established that ahead of time, but even in that, every single individual moment was fun and enjoyable and authentic, and even like caught me by surprise for some of them. Like even as a player who knew those moments were going to happen, they still caught me by surprise and they were still fun. So like if anyone in chat is like considering this and thinking like, oh well, I'm worried about the moment, don't. I promise you it'll still be salvaged. Having said that, someone else please take it away.
I'm gonna take this one because I can talk about this particularly, and I'm gonna explain some of my accomplishments to give context to my answer, because Fig Jam, which is fuck it, I'm good, just ask me. I have 10 years of improv experience. I've done scripted plays as well over time. There is a difference between surprise and shock. Your goal is to surprise your players. Surprises are fun. If you're just there to shock your players with a thing, you've lost the point of playing. Like I'd much like so never be afraid to just be like, and like again, so like I have all those qualifications. Not everybody's gonna have that. But yeah, so it's about surprise. It's about fun. And sometimes, if somebody gets deep enough in their, in their role or whatever, they might forget, like, oh, we did talk about this, but in character, this is how I'm reacting. That can happen. So it's about surprises. So make sure you have the conversations you need, and the more conversations you have, the more the rapport you build, and the more comfortable you are with your players, or your GM, vice versa. Like you want to work towards because everybody starts at a no until yes relationship. It is no until somebody tells you yes. If you have enough conversations, you can get to a yes until no relationship with people, because you've built trust. There's honesty between you. That's what you have to focus on. So don't worry about my players will know. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that.
I had to clip that moment just there. There's the difference between surprise and shock is something I think anyone who's considering GMing or GMing right now or writing right now, just please bookmark that in the back of your brains for the rest of your existence. Please.
I'm very clippable.
Like the number of times I have played a character and then had my GM spring surprise racism subplots on me. And I'm like, hey boss, I didn't ask for this at the fuck at all. So, can we not? So like, again, you want surprise. You don't need shock. You can get surprised without shock. You can keep your players consented and informed and aware without having to be like, oh, I'm just going to drop this on you and see how you handle it in the moment because I want your authentic in-moment reactions. Save that for the fun stuff, the good things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, save that for the cool shit. Like, save that for like when the NPC jumps in and like saves them. Like, you want shock there. That's the cool shit. Like, why do you want to shock them into fear? They're your friend. I'm sorry. I'm done. Anyway. Vince, Tate, one of you, please.
Well, I was going to say, like, just, I had this whole idea for a bit about, like, I wrote truth here and an arrow pointing up since I'm below Alicia on, like, the overlay. But then I was like, crap, I don't know if it's going to be reflected backwards or not. So anyways, I needed to let everyone know about my failed joke before I wanted to say I agree so hard with that, because I am a GM who I live for the oh shit moment, and that's oh shit good or oh shit like creeping sense of dread. Like I build monsters so that when they show up, the players go, excuse what? Like, and that is just like I live for that so much. But like, so just I've never heard it said that way before, and you absolutely nailed it. There's a difference between surprise and shock, and it's like, it's a roller coaster, because like you can either have surprise, like joy of like that sort of thing, or just kind of like that just the edge of fear. But either way, you chose to get onto that roller coaster and you're like, I'm here for this. This is what I'm here for. And because of the fact that you got the power to choose and the trust that like the person at the controls of the roller coaster isn't like powerfully inept or like cruel or something, then you can enjoy living on the edge of those really powerful emotions. So like, yeah, anyways, you get a failed joke and a contrived metaphor. So, you know, hey, you're welcome, internet. But yeah.
You could ask for anything more?
Yeah. I just like, again, the roller coaster metaphor holds up perfectly. Like, if you're on a roller coaster, you're gonna get flips and dips and dives and drops that are gonna like make your heart race, but you're at no point are you like, I'm gonna fucking die. Like, you're never worried about that. So if your campaign's a roller coaster, give your players loop-de-loops and drops. Don't make the like, you know, the car go off the track for a bit. Like, you don't have to do that. That's not required. Anyway, Tate, we haven't heard from you on this thought, so please, I want to hear from you on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with what's been said thus far. I think sort of the basis for building that, though, is like trust between yourself and a player. You know, that can be hard with someone you've never played with before. They can maybe take someone else's word on it, but like we started the Cyberpunk campaign, and I hadn't actually played with anyone other than Foxy, and I guess Alicia, although you're not part of our thing. But none of the other players I had, one of them was brand new to just tabletop in general. And so, yeah, I think, say, the sheet was a very good tool for just establishing that I'm here to listen to their concerns and absolutely stop something if they don't want me to. Having red cards, if you don't want to use that consent form, red cards can be a really good use of like, hey, just put this symbol down, this card down, this message to me, and whatever we're doing will stop right now. And letting someone know sincerely that you believe it. Maybe this is just the technical writer in me, but like, I think there is a way, if you just put some effort into it, to make extremely clear whatever you're saying is like, I have this idea that we could maybe do if you 100% are good with it. And like not putting any ego or any pressure on that at all, I think is critical, because then you can suggest more crazy, maybe more personal or emotional things in there, so long as someone trusts that a confrontation will stop something they don't want. Like they can 100% be in control of stopping. But anyways, that's...
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. I agree entirely. Like, there's definitely should be like there has to be a level of trust between player and GM where it's like, as a GM, I am trusting you as a player to let me know if I'm taking anything too far. And as a player, I'm trusting you as a GM to respect my boundaries and where the line is for me. Like, that's super important. Yeah, these are super important thoughts. I think everyone's kind of laying out some super important things. We have at least a couple more sort of like thoughts and principles to lay out here, but I want to give everybody a chance to grab a beverage, use the bathroom, re-up on food if you have it. It's almost dinner time for some of us here. So we're going to head over to a quick little break, maybe about 3 to 5 minutes. You know, do whatever you got to do. We'll be right back. Take care of yourselves and be safe, and don't go anywhere, and we'll see you in a little bit. Spree, take us out, all right? Welcome back, everybody. Hope we didn't keep you waiting too long. Sorry about that. My panelists are here. We are refreshed, recharged, and re-energized, and we hope you are too. I do want to mention, because I forgot to say so, please, if you have any burning questions for our panelists in chat, please paste them so we can make sure we get them over to them. Please. I want to hear what you have to say. It's important, and we care about you all. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for the 30 subs, by the way. That's insane, because that's happening. You guys are great. Anywho,
so many.
Besides me marveling at the fact that people somehow want to see my face on camera, let's go back to seeing your faces on camera, and let's talk about our next sort of thought, our question here. So, let's talk a little bit about, and I'm kind of gonna mix two questions here in one. The first one is about breaking the rules, balance, and player agency. Right? I have a sort of a principle. It's sort of a three-word motto I run by whenever I play the dragon game, as we call it here on Neon Lights. And anyone who's played with me, especially in Seven Sons, knows that three-word model is "fuck you, Gygax," which is quite simply just like any opportunity I get to break or shatter a rule in D&D, I break it, I shatter it, I do it. If you want to take two-weapon fighting and use your shield as your extra weapon, do it. Fuck it, I don't care. If you want to homebrew a spell that doesn't make any fucking sense, do it. Fuck it, I don't care. I am not here to worry about what the Wizards of the Coast said the rules of this world are. I don't give a fuck. I'm here so that you guys can tell your story with the players, with the characters that you've created, and to experience the things that you care about there. Like, that's my thing. So I violate every rule of D&D whenever I can, mostly just for the fun of it, but also because like I care about my players and their stories. But I want to hear like, do you guys think that there is a place for? We kind of hit on this earlier, like Vince, you mentioned like just like chucking out whole settings because like there's too much you have to touch around. Where do you sort of draw that line, and what do you think about the idea of like rule shattering and breaking around things when it comes to D&D or other TTRPGs? Like where do you find like sort of that thing? And I'm actually I'm gonna open up with you for this one, Vince, and we're gonna carry around the horn from there.
Okay. So first and foremost, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's like an empirical sort of line, but the way that actually it's funny because I talked with cool dude and awesome other streamer Anorian last weekend about game design and things like that. And one of the things that we talked about was the rule of cool, and kind of it was our opener to the discussion of going like, okay, so this is a good thing to orient your mind around, is like, what is the definition of a situation in which you would invoke the rule of cool? And Anorian kind of like picked a couple of different things, like, if there's like the teamwork thing, or like if someone gets kind of like, there's that rule of like awesome and like when people are getting excited. And for those who didn't see, the cool thing when he brought that up was I pulled out the Scum and Villainy book, and I was just kind of like, okay, so here's a cool thing, is that the rules for when you invoke the action roll, one of the bullet points for GMs that it gives the guidelines for is a roll happens, when something starts happening to the players and they respond. But another one of them was like when someone gets excited and picks up the dice to make a roll. And so like we were kind of talking about, kind of the, like, I've kind of, once again, I've Kool-Aid man my way through the wall and brought design with me. But basically the idea that like all of the stuff that you don't think is design. And, when you think about kind of curating specific kinds of emotional experiences, and kind of like tailoring things to people's particular behavioral problem-solving modalities and preferences in terms of different tropes. All of that stuff is design. It just so happens that like my brain happens to work on a very like problem-solving level, so it kind of breaks those things down. And like when, like, for instance, I'm a big baby. I cry at stuff all the time. Most often it's happy cry stuff, but like when something is really effective, the first thing that I think of is, why am I feeling this way? This is a really intense emotion. And then I will watch that thing 30 times and like, look and actually like pause it at the times that certain things affect me. And so when we talk about like breaking rules, when we talk about homebrewing things, for me, the rule of thumb, at least, is, does this get in the way of like getting to where we want to be with certain with D&D classes? It could be we want the class to feel a certain way, and this is making it feel clunky. Like one of my players played one of the Blood Hunter classes, and we ended up having to retool a bunch of stuff, and like that sort of thing. Or it could be a rule that's like, kind of messed up stuff, like race-based skill bonuses and things like that. I was like, fuck it, you all get a +2 and a +1, enjoy, like whatever. Or it could be like kind of more specific sorts of, oh wow, there's a lot of dungeon crawling and like survival in this, and there's no like source of NPCs or interaction. Fuck it, I'm gonna do this instead. Likewise, if there's a moment where like in the action where you're going to break a rule or something, I think that it's at those sorts of things that like you can kind of watch the ebb and flow in the energy of kind of the room, and sort of go like, okay, but if this sort of thing would get in the way of kind of that wave that's just cresting, I'm like, ultimately the experience of everyone at the table for me is paramount. And I say experience because, you know, we're saying fun, but like we can also talk about like horror games like Call of Cthulhu or things like that, where like you don't kind of traditionally think of like it as I'm fucking terrified and I can feel the blood pumping in my face as like fun in the moment. You only really kind of think about it afterwards, but you're engaged. You're gonna remember all of those things, and that stuff matters. And whether or not to break a rule, or interestingly enough, and I'm going to give an example of this, whether or not to decide to sustain the rule is usually for me based off of those two things. And the example that I want to give for actually sustaining the rule, even if it's a really heart-wrenching call, is one of the episodes of one of D20's series, A Crown of Candy. And there is a point where they're fighting on a bunch of like sinking ships, basically, and their heavily armored fighter has fallen into the water and is already like kind of sinking. But because he's a bodyguard, he has an ability with his shield that he can, as a reaction, move 30 feet to block damage from someone else, essentially. So Ryan Murphy, being the veteran D&D player that he is, goes like, hey, so I'm like 30 feet down. Can I use that? And one, look up the clip, because Brendan Lee Mulligan's face is priceless, and he's just like, you motherfucker. Like, and he lets him do it. But here's the thing, and I've been in this situation so often, because he's like, okay, so you can do that, and he does this, and he thinks for about 5 seconds, and he's like, okay, so I'm gonna let you do it if you pass a DC 20 athletic. This has to matter. Your armor has to matter in this scenario. And like, he's just like, okay. And everyone's like, bated breath. He makes it. He fucking like dives up onto the boat and like blocks a blow that would have killed one of like the royal family or something. And everyone flips the fuck out.
It's moments like that I think kind of make they make the game. They make the setting there. And I think what you're talking about here in terms of like this conversation brings up, I think Chrissy said in chat just now, hi Chrissy Chris, by the way, we love you, says for her it's about whatever areas her players want power. And if that means we break the system, then we do. And that's like literally, again, I'm sure Michelle and Tate will tell you, that's exactly how I play every game for mine, especially D&D. Like when it comes to like the way certain spells can be used, or the way certain items can be used, or the way certain actions are interpreted, or certain fighting styles, like I care more about, like, again, your agency, your power here. And like, I think that extends almost doubly when talking about sort of the justice angle here, because there are places in, especially in a lot of official D&D rule books, where it's like they present just like the worst things, the worst systems of the worst kind of people in the worst places, and say, if your players try to stop this, punish them, get them arrested, have them lose here, make sure that they know shouldn't do this. And I think that's the most disgusting thing to put in a game that's all about collaborative storytelling. Because if you put a world in front of me that has this horribly oppressive system, and my instinct as a player and as a character is to want to break it, then that's the story I want to tell. So who in the actual hell are you to tell me I can't? Like, GM or otherwise, who in that genuine hell are you? Are you not then perpetuating that same exact system of hierarchy you're presenting in that world? If you're giving it to me and saying, I can't break it, are you not then extending that hierarchy into the real world? Are you not perpetuating the same injustice you claim to be, like, escaping from in your D&D world? Oh, well, I don't want to deal with trying to fight against racism in my world because we're escaping from the real life. So let's just not talk about racism. Okay, but there's racism in your world.
To be apolitical.
Yeah, so, okay, but there's racism in your world. You're not ignoring... Like, you're not ignoring the world. You're perpetuating it. You're continuing it. You're telling every Black, every Latina, every marginalized person who sits at your table, I not only don't care about the issues you face, I don't want to change them. Because I have gone through the effort of putting you in a world that I have complete control over, and deliberately using that power to keep you from changing a system you don't like. How is that any different than doing it in real life?
It's Please,
interesting. Other people, I'm ranting enough. Take it away.
Yeah. I look at it very simple. There are no rules. There are only guidelines because I run this world. Deal with it. They're guidelines, and if I ignore them, I ignore them.
Yep. What's a rule? Fuck it.
Very simple for me.
Yeah, and I think
yeah. Oh, you go. Sorry.
Just like in terms of empowerment, like sometimes, and I mean maybe this is like me being again like my fuck you Gygax rules. I've learned sometimes just blatantly like skipping a rule in the same way of like kind of counterpointing your example, Vince. Like in the same way where sometimes holding to a rule can be a great moment of power and tension and fun. Obliterating a rule can be just as great. It can be just as fun. I'll give another example. When encountering that shitty NPC again and having bringing him into an encounter with her death goddess of a wife, their ex character decided to like show him up by casting a new spell on him that she had just learned at 8th level. It was a mind spike spell. It was going to require an intelligence save, and I could see her going like, "I'm going to use this spell. It's going to have this thing happen. I need him to make an intelligence save." And I just said he fails. Didn't look it up. Didn't roll a thing. Just said he fails. And could I have had him actually roll to make her feel impactful about him failing? Sure, but like, no. Why not just give again? If I'm talking about this story being about her empowerment, her taking this obviously broken system, this obviously unfair thing she's not a fan of, represented in cornucopia by this direct individual who she now has the power to do whatever she wants over. Why would I limit what she can do behind a die roll? Like, I'm already tipping the hat to her agency here. I'm already saying, this is your story now, go. Why stop that? Why pull that back? And like, seeing that moment where she goes, I need to make him a save, and I go, he fails. And she's like, oh fuck. Like, seeing her have that moment of, oh fuck, I have complete power here. Like, that's what I play for. That's what I GM for.
Diplomatic immunity.
Yeah, like I GM for that. Like I GM to give my players those moments where they go, "Oh fuck, oh god!" Like I have this power now. I have this agency here. That's the point. Like ultimately, for me at least.
And also, I think to build off that, doing that is a good way to remind your players, like, this is us together. Like, I may be the storyteller, GM, whatever role you want to be, but it's just like we are equals at this table. And it reinforces that, like, you have this power. If it is a storyteller, like, we're telling the story together. It's not just me dictating to you. We're equals.
Yeah,
we just have different roles, but we're equal.
I've only recently gotten in experience with Monster of the Week through playing Roundhouse with DMF Saint, and like that's been a system where I'm learning a lot about systems like that, where it's like, hey, listen, you as a player have almost as much, if not more, control over what's happening here than me as a storyteller here, and like. To use my coveted catchphrase here, when it comes to especially campaigns like Seven Sons, it is you guys' story. I am just tying up the ends. Like I don't care. And I mean, granted, one, it makes prep so much easier for me as a GM because I don't have to prep out traumatic plot lines. I just give them shit and I just go like, all right, do what you want. I'll figure it out. I don't know. Like,
that is.
It's helpful. Like it's helpful, but more than that, like you're saying, Alicia, it gives your players power, which I think is like the point. Like if I could sum up like all the conversation we've had so far in one phrasing, it would be give your players power, like empower your players more than anything else. Like that is what you should do if you are in any position where you are a storyteller, a keeper, GM, whatever it's called in the game you're playing. Empower your players, like give them the agency, give them the power, give them not just out of game, but in game, give them the power, give them the agency, let them attack.
Speaking of giving power, we still have some panelists who haven't answered.
Yes, true.
No, I find players want a satisfying story, not necessarily an easy one. It's again maybe this like trust between DM and player, but like, yeah, you can definitely. Player will suggest, hey, could I do this, like this stat for this check, even though it doesn't normally apply? Yeah, you can trust them. It's like, yeah, I could take that. Or just pushing it back a little bit. It's like, yeah, if you think that that's justified, then I'll buy it. Just allowing a certain amount of that collaboration just because one person is in charge and the other one isn't. And I find that people mostly give you an honest answer. And if they really don't give you an honest answer of like, I think this applies, and they're doing something that doesn't at all, I don't know, trying to use what was the bit, lip reading to pick a lock? Was that what was happening in lip reading Cyberpunk?
Hey,
Yeah,
now,
it's like-
wait. Now, hold on, wait. I can justify this one because
Your
the tongue
Honor,
is
I
the
may be a
strongest muscle in the
simple
body,
decker.
and therefore is.
I don't know. I just
No, I find
you're in the wrong place.
honestly, a player will give you an honest answer of like, okay, no, that doesn't work, and they'll give you their best thing they think is justified. And if they're going to try and take advantage of that kind of leeway, like, I don't know that they're a player that, like, you need to have a conversation about trust and what they actually want out of the campaign, I think, at that point, because, yeah, like, people want a satisfying story, and it might be unsatisfying to say, I use this thing that doesn't apply at all to this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what if? Oh,
Yeah, please, go ahead, please.
I mean, I guess, like, bouncing off of Tate's point, right? Like, as a player in one of your campaigns, I think one of the best things about, like, just, like, asking you, like, hey, can I do this, is that, like, yeah, you present an option, but, like, if I present another option, it's just a different way of, like, saying, like, okay, well, maybe it is like a, how do you call it? Everyone has their own choices, right?
Yes.
How you get to the end is more important than the actual end. So the fact that you can choose between on which direction you go in the journey, right, is, I think, just as important as, like, getting to that point.
Yeah, and good improv is on the rule of yes and the tabletop equivalent of that is, yeah, roll for it.
You got a yes and.
Yeah.
Let them roll for it. If you can possibly come to any kind of agreement as to what they're rolling, do it. Let them interact with the mechanics of the game.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of my favorite ways to break the rules is failures. Your quote unquote fail, like, let's say rolling a 1, like, let's take D&D, doesn't mean you can't progress forward.
Yeah.
You can have your, like, magical, I'm tumbling down the avalanche and somehow land on the first place podium. You can have that happen. It just changes how it gets there. So yeah, the 1 is not automatically you can't progress. I'm not saying it always has to be that way, but it's an option.
No, it's something I really love out of something like No,
I think that's a really important thing to bring into, like, sort of like the next thing I was going to talk about, which, like, kind of goes into, like, we've talked a lot about, like, ways to kind of, like, push past the mechanics of games for the sake of, themes of justice and restoration, and I think that's super important. I want to start pulling this into a more direct campaign thought, like talking about this in terms of like actual world building. And this is going to be a part where I reference, I don't know, maybe it's even to like a degree our mission statement here at Neon Lights. We talk about this all the time. Putting the punk in cyberpunk is something we talk about all the time, because we started our campaign, our cyberpunk campaign, right around the time that the video game 2077 came out, and like talking nonstop about it's like, this is not cyberpunk at all. It's cyberpunk in aesthetic only. It's got all the look, all the feel, none of the actual anti-corporate, anti-police, anti-authority, actual central parts of this. And so we made a creed pretty early in that not just our cyberpunk campaign, but any game we play, any story we tell here at Neon Lights will be about punching up. It'll be about combating unfair authority, about attacking unfair hierarchy, whether that's social attack or literal actual war. Mostly the second one I found, but that's just how we get down. So I guess just like, where do you find that for you? Like, what are some of the best ways you like to do that in your campaign? And this can be, I leave this open as well, because like I feel like there's a lot of ways you can talk about this, because there's justice in large scale senses where you can talk about larger themes like unfair hierarchies, racism, sexism, larger things like that. Or you can go more personal, where, and again, I hate to keep calling her out even though she's not here. The example of like Sir Heck with the NPC I had in Seven Sons, where like that's more talking about like sexual harassment or like sexual violence, things that like can be more interpersonal or more like directed restorative justice. So using either example, larger systemic restorative justice or more directed restorative justice, where are places you find it best to put those in your campaign? You can answer this question in terms of like examples, ideas for new GMs, inspiration, any of that. Oh, sorry. And let's go ahead and start with Alicia for this one, because I haven't started with you yet.
Sure thing. So I think that the best place to start is, I think it's best to start small. Like, you can have a bigger goal for the world, but if you start with a small scale, like, okay, in this particular town, or even maybe a little bigger, like in this city, there is this aspect of this world. And if, basically if your players react to it, well, like, yes, this is the thing we want to engage with, you can expand it out like, okay, it's here, but it's also other places. And if it's not, it was just that one city. There was a small town in Oklahoma. Not basing that on a real life example at all. As opposed to like in, the wider thing. Because while it can be, because you have to be aware of like what players you have at your table. Let's say one of your players is all gung ho about it. Yes, I admit it. But the other 3 or 4 aren't. You have to take that into account. So I think it's best to start again, start with the town. Like, let's say start with the town. With that one issue. Maybe it's the preacher. I don't know. I have complicated feelings about religion. But somebody, one person. That's my opinion.
No, I like the one person approach. That's I think that's a different way than I've heard it taken normally. Like, I feel like most, especially me, I tend to like think big picture when I think about themes like these. So hearing the idea of like start with one person and build out from there is a new approach. Please, someone else, please take the reins on that.
I feel like you can kind of do. Oh, you can go, Michelle, if you want.
No, I mean, no, you can go first.
No, Michelle, you're going. No, you've gone third all this time. You're going.
Okay. I guess like jumping off of Alicia's point. For it's kind of. I know, Fox, you do this all the time, and you think like big, right? You think big, overarching, like like theme topics, right? But at least for me, right, it's easier to just build your NPCs first, I think, and you think about like, okay, what are their problems, right? Like what's most important for them, right? And I think one of like the greatest, I guess one of the best examples is like an entirely unintentional one. Like the first one shot that I did, like everyone spent forever talking to I'm sorry to say this, Tate, but it was like I kind of just like put this NPC in there, a butler like golem creation that was just in there to direct the players, but like through a conversation they developed like this whole like an entire talk about like servitude, about like freedom, about and like all of that came in just because of this one character, and like focusing in on your character, I think, is very important.
That's
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's important. Like talking about, I remember that one shot, and I remember like we hadn't even put a whole lot of thought into that NPC much, but like the players built this very in-depth connection that you organically kind of ran with, and like it became a sort of almost like a central theme for the one shot that we hadn't really planned on. But I think it's a great example of like when these moments happen, these things that are important to your players, important to like important to your characters, like and like the story they want to tell, you can as a DM, as a storyteller, organically run with those. If you had a certain idea of what the plot was, but the players all seem like they want to free this, the house's indentured servants who they don't think are being treated fairly, guess what? You're focusing on that now. Your goal as a storyteller is not to pivot them on the road towards what you want. It's to tell the story that's already forming as it's forming. So if those moments come up organically in session across the campaign, embrace them, love them. Like, that's the thing. So yeah, I think that's a super important point, Michelle. And I think it's I think you personally, as a DM, are really good at doing that. Like seeing your players' reactions organically in the moment and playing them into your larger play. I think you're really good at doing that personally.
I almost need to apologize because it definitely was the character I made for that one shot that caused all of that deviation. But
no, that's great.
No, I think you kind of do both, though. At least in my opinion, is you start with a small character and you start with a large concept. Because like, I think it's easier in the moment to do that adjustment if you're like, no, I have this idea of what a campaign can be, and you can adjust that. But just having an idea of like, okay, what issues are in this world, what systemic problems are there, so that then I from there would probably start with making an NPC and then a town and then a city. But I would want to have that like goal, because I don't think you can build a authentic sort of experience of oppression or systematic issues without doing it both at the same time, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think there definitely is a lens for like a middle ground approach you can take as well, where like there's sort of like a space between like considering the larger picture, which I think like everyone should definitely do whenever you consider attacking these larger problems, because they are always larger problems and they are larger systems we're talking about. So you can never just consider them in the immediate. So I think it's always important to take that larger scale approach to a certain degree. But yeah, there's sort of a line you can walk there. Definitely a middle ground approach you can take. I agree with you, Tate. Definitely. I guess that means we haven't gotten Vince. We haven't gotten you on this, huh?
Well, I definitely, I'm largely in agreement with pretty much the, like, you kind of make an NPC, you kind of start with a person, you start where the party starts. I guess more than one sense of the term. But in thinking about this topic and in thinking about it in restorative justice terms, I am brought back to a phrase that I remember reading on Twitter when we were getting when the Black Lives Matter protests were like at their height last summer. Because what was happening is that a lot of I'm just gonna say a lot of white leftists were kind of getting into the more into the fuck cops more thing, rather than kind of the okay, but you remember why we're saying fuck cops, right? And the thing that came up that really affected me and that I carry with me now is the idea that you have to love the people who you want to help more than you hate the people you want to hurt. And when it comes to this idea of you're talking about the NPC, you're talking about the community and everything. For me, it's okay, so shifting the lens, not just talking about the the thing that they're going to fight or the villain that they're going to take down or anything like that, but the most heartfelt moments that I've had in say my Prince of the Apocalypse campaign is in a little village that gets 3 lines of text in the actual book. But what that happened was that they got the village is there to be attacked by the Earth cult. It's literally just pretty much there to get destroyed. But instead what happened is instead of I think I had a couple of players absent that week. So instead of just moving on to the next thing, they helped them rebuild the village. And so they had a week of downtime or something that I put in there. And there were these really affecting sorts of moments where and it was one of those kind of fun thing of a bunch of really good rolls and really bad rolls kind of stumbled into one of the players just kind of decided to pick cook as a profession for one of their characters, and essentially through a series of different sorts of interactions, their hobgoblin fighter stumbled into the old story of someone taking the pot around town and everyone throws in the bits of food that they have, and there was this really kind of heartfelt thing of they all rebuilt the tavern, and they all they all kind of celebrated, and they got to see the joy in the people, and they got to learn their names. So I got run through the GM gauntlet of being fuck, this is Jeremy, and I got that 8 times, but it was 100% worth it because they saw them as people and they got to experience that very heartfelt sort of this is why you fight evil. This is why you do it. You don't just do it because fucking stabbing a dude feels good. It's a fucking get help if that's the thing that you do it for. Right. When people have you do it so people have a roof over their head and food in their stomach, and they don't have to worry about some asshole with power getting off on this idea that they can just make them do whatever they want. And getting the opportunity to see that joy amongst all of these different characters made it so that they were invested in this whole sort of scenario, because now when they're at like their worst adversity, they're gonna think not just about like, oh, my character's gonna die, I'm gonna have to roll a new one. They're gonna think about like, you know, the mom and like her two kids who were like, you know, the tavern keeper and things like that, and what's gonna happen to them if you don't stop this villain, like, and all of those sorts of things. When I say, like, you know, go back to that example that I gave of like, it has to matter, I'm talking about the world as much as I'm talking about the rules.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. And like, to shout out somebody on that kind of point, as this is the first time I'm trying to put it on this panel, Tate, I think you handle that efficaciously and like amazingly when it comes to like Neon Lights and like Cyberpunk campaign. Like, I'm playing a character who like is a street tough, like orphaned kid who like dealt a bunch of drugs, went to jail, dealt some more drugs, and is now running for mayor. Like, you know, like there's a lot of things going on there, but like there are these moments in the game where I get to like give these speeches, like talk to people in character. And for me, like for, you know, a black kid who grew up in the hood of West Philly, who went to college and learned all these things about like, you know, sociology and like about all these problems that face communities like mine, and seeing all the issues that I dealt with growing up and that people just like me deal with growing up, and feeling like it's just too massive for me to do anything about, to be placed in a character in a world where I'm playing a character just like me, a character who just like me is a product of systems that weren't built for him. But in this world, in this setting, this character who's just like me not only can like work at fixing that, but I can like speak and say the things that I wish I could scream from the top of my lungs to everybody around me in real life. I can say that in the game, in character. And in those moments, I feel empowered. I don't just feel like I'm acting in character. I'm not just improvising there. I'm like venting. I'm just talking about things that affect me, that matter to me, you know? And yeah, like I think just like obviously it's a bit like it worked out for like the way the campaign played out, obviously, but like just I think that specifically is an amazing example of like where I as a player feel like you handle that just flawlessly, personally.
Well, to be fair, I got a lot of world building done by the people who make Cyberpunk Red.
That's fair. Yeah,
that is set up to facilitate those kind of rants. And, you know, like I said, I think players want to play an interesting story. Letting you guys put just as much work into that as I did. You just also forced me to think about the political machinations of voting in Night City. So, you know.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Well, I got one last question. It's been a wonderful, amazing evening, and I wish I had 1,000 more questions to keep you all here. But unfortunately, I only have one more. So let's bring it on home with this last sort of topic to talk about, and then we'll finish it up there, all right? So, the last thing I want to talk about here is session zeros, knowing your party, and collaborative storytelling. We talked a lot here about how the point in anything we do here is telling a story here. We're all about grouping together to tell stories, to tell a collective effort here. Player, GM, storyteller, all on the same side here. And Vince, you talk about a lot about like, you know, D&D being like your safe space where you can kind of like examine all your players' interactions and kind of pick out, you know, the way they interact with certain things, what they want, what they do, what they react to. For people here who have played with others, who have GM'd for others, which I think all of us have at least GM'd once maybe, talk to me about that process for you, whether it's like the session zero process, because I mean, for those who aren't aware and it doesn't know, a session zero colloquially refers to a session that takes place before the first in-game session. It's where, you know, the GM and players group up either in character or out of character to talk and either create their characters or, you know, introduces them to the group or establish the story, basically to set up all the boundaries and lines that are going to be, you know, not crossed and walked along within this campaign. That's what a session zero is. If anybody's not aware, just felt like I make it clear. So when it comes to knowing your party, when it comes to setting expectations and like consent and all those things and session zeros, where does all that fit into your storytelling style, your gaming, your style of running a table? Where does all that fit in for you? I guess like if I had to make this like a question thing, if you're going to run session zero right now, what are the things you have to make sure you hit in that session zero, basically? And let's go ahead and start with Michelle on this one. Yeah, you.
Okay. All right. So if I had to run a session zero right now, holy crap. First off, I would probably panic a little bit.
Fair.
But things that need to happen. First, we talk about logistics. this is just my brain going on right now, going like, okay,
Fine, go ahead.
logistics.
Let's go. You're good, babe. Do you think?
Logistics. What like consent? Question mark. Have you figured out your characters? Maybe. And if they haven't figured out characters, we can like have a conversation about like, hey, do you need any help? Whatever. Right. Like that. Right? Like, because it's sometimes people don't have characters, and that's fine. What's the general setting look like? I mean, I kind of panic usually on session zeros because I don't really know what I'm supposed to do there. I've only done 3 so far. I'm sorry.
For now.
But like, I guess like it's important to just talk, right? Like, yeah, you get the you get the logistics, you get your whatever out of the way, but like, just explain things. I actually wanted to like talk about something else, but that's okay. We can talk. We can come back to me on that later. I was actually I just wanted to like shout out like Proper Nerdy for his generational story, his generational game, because it's an amazing piece of work on collaborative storytelling, and it's literally designed for collaborative storytelling. I'm gonna shut up about that now, but if anybody else wants to like talk about it, since I know too.
Oh yeah, the only reason why I didn't get to mention it so far because I mentioned it on the last panel I literally just came off of, and I thought that was this panel, so I thought I already mentioned it, so I didn't mention it again. But that's that. We'll talk about that. Don't worry. Tate, you had some thought there?
No, I'm saying you could.
Oh, no,
finish that thought though on generational. No, I mean Michelle can. I mean, I don't mind if you want to go on that. Is what I'm saying.
Please, if you have more to say, please. Like, if you want to talk about generational right now, please feel free. We can bring that up now. Now's the time. It's not touching, baby. So do it.
Okay, well, basically, it's a game where like everyone there's not really a GM. Really, it's like everyone just sits at the table, like rolls dice, and just like starts creating a world, right? And I think I guess part of it is like it's built into the rules on like just consent, how to make like even like things like, okay, well, I'm not necessarily okay with like what somebody said, like this is like maybe talking while you're playing about like what are you okay, what you're not okay with, or even like things like, okay, but like I can retcon this like in the next turn, or even talking about like, is it okay if you feel about retconning things because it's history. I'm sorry, I will go on a rant about this, but anyways, it's really it's a good stuff, so I will stop. Sorry.
Stop apologizing. Don't apologize for your wonderful input.
Everyone on the internet, and I'm not lying. Don't look at the chat. Everyone on the internet, every single person that's ever been on the internet is here specifically to hear your thoughts on things. Specifically you. Everyone. Okay? So don't apologize. Don't look at the numbers. Every person that's ever been on the internet ever, even the dead ones, are here to hear your thoughts on this specifically.
Snowball 3, is that you?
Oh, no. Exactly. The whole internet. Everyone's here. I don't want to hear your apologies for thoughts. Now give me more thoughts.
I was going to say, I'm an apology lodestone. If I'm here as a Canadian, like you can't, it's going to crash the stream. You can't have that.
That's fair. I understand. But yeah, do anyone have thoughts on session zeros and things? Any other thoughts?
I was going to say, in addition to all of the different things that we've kind of covered, rather than kind of like spend more time on the stuff that we're trying to prevent, I know a lot of the time when I come to start a campaign, I come with an idea. I come with a certain kind of style, just because like no GM is a blank slate. There's certain sorts of things that like you enjoy and everything, and we talk about like best practices and things like that. But there will be certain kind of like, if you think of it like a volume mixer, the sliders are going to be different for every GM in terms of like how willing they are to like house rule a thing, or like all of those different things that Michelle was talking about. And in addition to kind of watching, like kind of getting the feel for the room and getting this idea that like okay, how is everyone feeling, especially if you have players that you've never GM'd for the first time, how's everyone feeling matching up with that particular harmony, and also kind of going, are y'all here for this story that I'm interested in telling? Because we're talking about the needs of the players a whole lot, but like as someone who is kind of like a forever GM, I'm kind of like, yeah, I have this idea and kind of want to like do this sort of thing. And like, you know, you want kind of everyone to at least be somewhat on the same page. And if there happens to be like kind of genre tropes that you happen to use that you find are really fun, and someone's like, oh, that's not really my cup of tea, and there's a lot of those things that are just kind of like not lining up, then it's just kind of like it is cool and fine and healthy to kind of go either as a player, like, y'all seem cool. I don't know if this particular campaign is going to be for me. Or as a GM, ask that player, like, do you think, based off of what I've said, that this is going to kind of match up for your playstyle? Because, speaking of being a Canadian, we have this thing of like politely going along with stuff and be like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine, and like all of that sort of stuff. But like, it's enthusiastic consent sort of thing. It's like, if it's not matching up to where like you feel excited to go on this adventure, then it might not be the adventure for you, or like we just might not line up. Right. Or I might know another GM who might be more like suited to that. And I think that getting that feel, as much as like the justice related, like, the lines and veils and the setting the terms of engagement, I guess I'll say in that term what Foxy and what pretty much everyone has brought up at some point earlier, of the not only what do you or do you not want to see in this campaign, but also in what way would you like to engage these things. In addition to those things are just the texture and the landscape of everything else surrounding that. And that has to do with, the volume mixer sliders of the players, of the GM, of the setting, and all of those sorts of things. And finding that particular mixture of things that has the best harmony is all of the sorts of things that I'm looking at in a session 0.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, those are great ways to sort of sum that all up. Thank you very much for that, Vince. Other thoughts on this? Any other thoughts on session 0s and on knowing your party and on the collaborative storytelling? Any thoughts on this?
Alicia, did you want to go?
You go ahead. You were going to start to talk. Go ahead.
No, that was what I was going to ask.
That is politeness nonsense. Talk!
I know, right? Okay. Anyways, honestly, when I make a session 0, it depends on if the group got together for a reason. Like, if I collected people saying, do you guys want to play with D&D, then I start on that, like, assumption. Or if it's just, we want to play a game together. I have a home game that our session 0 wasn't just, what characters we want to do, but also, like, okay, what story do we want to tell? And started from that, and I literally had no idea where it was going to go from there. I had ideas of this would be cool, but I tend to build, like, the goal of a session 0 is to give me the materials to build the whole world or campaign or social structure, what have you, based on what the players want to do.
Right.
Yeah, if I have a thing I really want to do, I'm like, hey, can I pitch you this idea? And yeah, maybe you're right, Vince, have that conversation about, I don't know if this group is where you want to be if you are the person who's not agreeing with everyone else on like what you want to play. It's not a problem what you want to play, but you do need to find other people who want to play that with you. Neon Lights in Night City is a good example of, I talked to you guys first on like, what's your character going to be like? I don't really care about the mechanics yet, just what's their deal, where have they been? And then I also ask, where do you want to see them going? Or like, what's like the arc that you think this character would be? And that helps me have things to
I agree.
Build a society. I basically completely populated the combat zone in Night City just with people that you guys would want to talk to based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think asking your players what the arc they want is something that I enjoyed. One thing I love that you did when it came to Neon City Lights was asking us what media sort of we thought about when it came to like this setting, like asking us what things enter your mind when you think about like the story you want to tell here. And I thought that was great because where someone could because we talked about like how like based on the way things work, cyberpunk could easily be used for like your typical like cyberpunky like altered carbon hacker anti-corporate campaign setting. Could easily also be Mad Max road trip across like the deserts of America. You could also easily get
Cyberpunk Red can be that,
and then you had someone like me where like, and again to like connect this into like what we're talking about here. When I said I wanted something that's kind of like the kind of like trappings of like the movies I watched growing up, I wanted something that kind of like almost like Poison the Hood, like Juice, almost like paid in full kind of almost. I was like, I want like a gang
love
movie,
this.
like
I
Cyberpunk.
love this.
Like that's what
It honestly fits
like,
genre-wise pretty well, actually.
Well, yeah, but like that's what I thought. Like I read the book and I was
more
like,
slap
okay.
bass in my cyberpunk, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, like literally, my cyberpunk is like the main character of every drug movie I've ever watched, just like as me. It's not. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Well,
So,
that
like,
was very interesting. No, sorry, you can finish.
yeah, but like when I read the book, like I felt that like I want to tell this kind of story, and with a different GM, like if I just walked into a pickup game of Cyberpunk Online from like a Roll20 at LFG, I would have felt super weird coming in like that because I don't know what my GM's doing. I don't know who I'm playing with. I don't know what they're gonna say about the thoughts that I have. But again, because you took that time to establish a rapport and a trust with me, I felt comfortable saying, "Hey, yeah, I kind of want these things." And the fact that I said them ahead of time made me feel even more emboldened to build the character that I wanted because I knew like my GM's considering the shit that I want in this story. So I'm not gonna worry about building a character with a certain arc and a certain sort of character idea that won't be talked about at all. It'll be completely ignored because I like that's that it's been established. And again, like taking that into like what we're talking about here with like justice and everything, it's super relevant here because like if your player has a certain theme they want to hit or don't want to hit, they can tell you that ahead of time. Or if you as a GM, because let's not forget, GMs are people here too. Sometimes you as the GM are the person who wants to see the authority, the authority figure taken down in your story because you want that catharsis. So sometimes you can be the one to say like, hey guys, I really want to tell this kind of story. Are we down for that? Like what's up? What's going on here? So session zeros I think are critical in the agree like
what you just said reminds me of an example of very recent where I was in fact the GM. One of the things I ran a superhero game recently, and it was a player who actually ended up not being able to make it because pipes bursting, house problems. But one of the things we did,
being a homeowner,
right? But one of the things we did with his character, it was sort of deal with the whole. Do we remember the quote unquote golden age of comics where if you happened to be black and had superhero, you had black in your name, regardless of the fact that there was another, like, it's just like Black Falcon.
Yeah.
Black Lily, all those things, just like, is there another character called Falcon? No, you're black. No. So
you're the black one, so you got to make sure they know it.
One of the things we did in the character creation, we just took it to that nth degree of just like, you know what? So the character's hero name was literally Black Boy. And they were like a generational hero. So there was Black Boy, Black Man.
That's
I think
amazing.
It was like Dude Black or something, just to that nth degree. It's just like, no, we're gonna deal with it because we're gonna take it to the nth degree to show you how ridiculous this trend was in the first place.
Yeah,
like does it make you uncomfortable? Do you have a problem with it? Cry for me.
That's pretty good.
I think that's a story, and I think like it's even like to a certain degree of like when I wrote Toward the Farthest Dawn, the Black History Month Starfinder one shot I ran over at TPK Roleplay, which Alicia was in, which was super fun. I had briefly considered running it with all non-black people just to be like, yeah, we're gonna work through this shit today, like, and
we're gonna learn today.
Yeah, like I
don't learn today.
Even that can be the kind of thing where I think it might be important. And I think this is the part where we get a little bit spicy here towards the end. If moments like that happen, if you as a DM and you happen to look across your table and, if you as a DM say like, hey, I'm working on this campaign and there's this setting going on. I think there's some racism going on here with the tieflings in my campaign. And then you go to your party, you say, hey guys, so there's some mild racism happening in this campaign. Is that cool? And they're all like, no, absolutely not. And then you look at your table, and they all look a fair degrees lighter than I do. Maybe that's a conversation you have to have. Hey, why don't we want to talk about this right now? I get that we're all escaping real life and playing D&D, but is there a reason we don't want to hit on this theme right now? It's not like it affects any of us in real life. What's the problem? Like, so, again, just put a little price on it at the end. Like, I think there's even a market where you can say, like, sometimes you as the dungeon master and especially like talking about like people in positions of privilege who should be using their power to speak up on these things. If you find yourself in those spaces, sometimes you have to be the one to say no. We're gonna work through this and we're gonna do it seriously. So if you're not here to do that, you can shift to your left, but don't think we're all running from this just because you don't want to. Like sometimes you gotta play a little hardball with your friends, even if it means like having some slightly uncomfortable conversations. You know, I think it's just a matter of like, again, always like trusting your group, trusting your players, and like having those conversations early and often. And like you said, not just having it once, but checking in, like constantly saying like, "Hey, I know we said it was cool if we talked about this, you know, but we're a couple sessions into it now. Where are we at? How are we feeling? You cool with it? Should I pull back some? Should I go harder? Do you want this not at all? What do you need? Like, let me know." But like, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all I gotta say. So I want to hear if there are any closing thoughts on this session 0.
I didn't actually answer the question about session 0. And then, although real quick to off that last thought, I don't think they're here anymore, but HP Last Hero, talked about having the sort of like lines consent document as like a handout in Roll20, which I hadn't heard of. Like, I really like this. So it's just like, it's there all the time. It's a living document. So it's easy access. Like, we're not just going to put this in an Excel sheet and then forget about it.
Yeah. I love that.
So
having
definitely that. Absolutely. But now to answer the actual question, because everybody's answer is great. And so I'm going to actually answer it from a more mechanical and timing standpoint. Instead in a session 0, I find that it's best to, again, this is just for timing reasons, like to explain a little bit about the game you intend to play, and then go to the people who have a character idea already, and then after that, go to your more people who don't, or your more shy players, because what that does is it allows the people who already have characters to make slight tweaks based on what you've said you're going to do as a game. And the players and your players who are either shy or just don't have an idea yet get to listen to the world setup, how the players who had a character idea reacted to the world setup, and then perhaps they have an idea for character after that. So just from a time basis, that's how I like to lay it out.
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. I don't think there's any other like better way to explain it than that. I think that's a perfect summation of all the points we're making here of just like, there's a lot mechanically to this, just like more than, there's a lot there's a lot more to this than just like talking about it. There's a mechanical part to this too. There's a material component to these conversations that have to happen, and a material consideration that has to be made there. Christy just made the most amazing point, which I missed because I wasn't in chat at the moment. Just like, if someone's uncomfortable, it means they're learning, and it's okay to learn in TTRPG. And I think that's a super, super, super relevant point to learn. I want to hear other people's thoughts on this. Just the idea of, sometimes that discomfort can be a thing that like you shouldn't. Not only should you not shy away from, but you shouldn't let other people shy away from. Saying like, "Hey, I know this might be uncomfortable for you to talk about right now. This is a bit of a weird conversation for us to be having, but let's see if we can interrogate why." And there are good and bad ways to do that. There are good and horrible ways to go about that. There are great and terrible ways to go about that. No question. But I think it's important that we always consider that ultimately what we are engaging in here is an exercise in collaborative fiction, collaborative storytelling. And fiction, like I've said multiple times here, always a mirror to real life. Always, always, always a mirror to real life. So always keep in mind that like, when you are mirroring real life, you will sometimes encounter real life things, and you will have to deal with them in ways that might not always be simple or easy or hand wavy. It might be difficult. It might require some post-game breakdown, some aftercare, some talk with your group about what just happened, about what things were said, what things were done. I don't want to go off on a spiel here because, we're already running over the time meter here, but I guess I just want to do this. Because you guys have said so many incredible things. I have been just absolutely inundated with information and new thoughts about things from you all. Thank you so much for joining me and for giving me your thoughts here. I would love it if you could all just pass around just some final closing thoughts here about just generalized restorative justice in your settings here, in these things. Just give me some generalized thoughts on your thing here. Please take your time with those statements here. And also, if you could, as a fun thought, maybe shout out one GM you like a lot. Doesn't have to be one here. It could be one you played with before, one you're playing with right now, someone you want to play with in the future. It could be somebody here. It could be somebody somewhere else. Doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and make that shout out happen whenever you want. And let's go in the same way we went in when we introed. So that's Tate. You take it away for us. All right?
Yeah. This is maybe not as broad, but it was a funny thought I had. You remind me of like I asked you guys for media when we were starting Cyberpunk, and everyone else picked like very traditional Cyberpunk stuff, and then I went and really got a hold of like the movies and media and stuff that you wanted, and I suddenly realized that Cyberpunk Red, the setting book, has only punk rock. Like all of its music that it very specifically calls out is just punk rock. There's no like rap or electronic or anything like that, and that was, I think, adding that back into the universe the way it should was at least a little bit restorative.
It felt good.
It wasn't just for your character either. Yeah, I was like, no, come on.
Yo,
There's gotta be some more genres.
And it's weird because they say it. Like the book says, like, oh, rocker boy doesn't mean you do rock. It just means like you're inspiring. So when I wanted to build like a like samurai rapper as a rocker boy character, and I was like, okay, cool. Where can I find the flavor for this in the lore? There was nothing. It was like, all right, well, you can either be like a punk rock kind of guy, or you can just not. I was like, okay, well, that's not fun. But yeah, I admire you, like you and like mostly your patience with me and just being like, no, wait, what do you mean this rapper's not in this? Fix that right now, Tate. So I appreciate.
Yeah, well, I think that that's part of those maybe uncomfortable conversations. Only really uncomfortable if you start getting defensive about changes you have to make in that situation. And I don't. You're like, no, come on. There's got to be. Yeah, so
Night City contains diverse sorts of music, like punk rock and the rest. Like,
yeah, a little. I get it. The aesthetic was built on. Punk. Yeah, the aesthetic was built on old cyberpunk books from like the 80s, and they just updated it from there. So I kind of get it, but also like, no, absolutely, there would be way more music than that. But it was a fun anecdote, I think, and just like, yeah, be ready to fuck with the world that you have in based on your character stuff, because that's just part of adding the kind of restorative thing that you want, making something more personal to the character that actually is experiencing the thing that you're doing.
Fair enough. Do you want to shout out GM that you like a lot?
I don't know. I think that I'm really appreciating how Foxy's handling Seven Sons in like the same way he says he's been appreciating me. It's like, no, I really like. I threw him a lot of GM bait and made kind of a crazy character that is very mechanically weird for a very specific kind of flavor. And it's been fun so far that he's handled that. And a lot of my very nitpicky, like, okay, so I have this idea how to make this mechanic work, that if I take this and do that and all that, and then Foxy's like, yeah, sure, I trust your mechanics better. I'm like, oh, okay. I put too much work into that.
Thank you, friend. It's been a joy to run a campaign for you and Michelle and the rest of the crew. It's super, super fun. Thank you. I was hoping to avoid anyone shouting me out as a GM, but whatever. That's fine. We'll keep it moving. Alicia, please.
I'm going to use nepotism as my GM shout out, so it won't be you. I'm Alicia. You can find me on Twitter at ng98. I tweet things, mostly puns and other things I'm in, and snakes because I have snakes again, so I'm very happy. Let's see. In terms of one of my very favorite GMs, which who I have the privilege of being one of the partners of, is It's the Riddler, D. They are wonderful. I've been a part of a couple of their different games, and even the games where I'm not a part of them. They do a great job, professional DM. Also, like music, they do music. If you like streaming, they do streaming. They do it all. He's great. It's wonderful. And I love him. Aww. Yes, I will blatantly shout out anything. People sponsor me. I will show anything.
Hashtag non-sponsored content.
Sponsor me. Okay.
Eat your burrito or whatever it is you make at the beginning and end of every stream. Let's go.
Call me.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you, Alicia, for sharing. I guess that brings us to Vince next, yeah?
Okay, so I have my GM in mind. Could you repeat what the last question was? Because I've
general thoughts around just the things we've been talking about.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess just kind of tying things together for what I've already said. All of this stuff is an ecosystem. Basically, your mechanics, your world, your table, both as the lived experiences of people at your table, your lived experiences as a GM, and the going into making a campaign or even building a whole game with intent rather than it could be something for everyone. That's a marketing tactic. They're lying to you. Never listen to them. But make something with intent decide what kind of story you're going to tell. With your group, with the mechanics that you use, with the world that you build. All of that stuff matters. And the more that you focus all of that horsepower in a single direction, the stronger of an engine that you will create to drive your narrative.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. Yeah, that's a pretty good bow to put on all the points you've made so far today, Vince. Just like, yeah, honestly, I think it's a pretty solid. Just like, it's super important to remember that this is all a living experience. It's not just, the books and the dice. There's the table and the people and the reactions, and all of it exists together as one. Like the word you use is perfect. It's an ecosystem. It's all together, and I think that's super important to remember that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that wisdom for us.
And for my GM, as much as it was, I'm kind of hopping on the trend right now because we are deep in the summer of Abria. I have been lucky enough to have a sparing few conversations with Quiddy in DMs and things like that. And like, not only is she a spectacular GM, but like her and I match up on like the ADHD storytelling like wavelength. And I'm just like, no, please, I would either just love to further talk shop or just be at one of her tables, because like, yeah, it's so I freaking love her work. Absolutely.
Yeah, I worship at the altar that is her. She's amazing. Abria is so fucking good. And yeah, seeing her like take off like this. Let's not even get into a derail right now. She's fucking amazing. Love you, Abria, if you're somehow watching this. Also, let me play with you, please. Okay. Anyway, Michelle, your last one. Take it away, love.
Okay, so I guess on the first topic, restorative justice in general, I don't know how to put this, but like, okay, this is gonna sound really fucking weird for me, but I'm just gonna say it. Mm-hmm. Consent is sexy. So, but beyond that, right? I feel like I know you're like cry laughing right now, kid.
That was great. Sounds really fucking weird for me. I wasn't ready. That was great.
Okay, but beyond that, right? They just everything about and I feel like this is common sense, but but to be fair, like I've been blessed by like having like, two awesome GMs in this chat with me who I have worked with a lot. But like a lot of things come down to just having a conversation. Right? Like talking to people. Just, hey, are you okay with this? Just ask. Like, as a player, as a GM, just ask. Like, hey, is it okay if I do this? Or, hey, are you comfortable with this? That's the first. Like, I feel like that's the first thing you can do. Really, just asking someone.
Conversation, super important. I agree. Couldn't say it better myself.
Okay. And on the second part, I would shout out both you, Fox, and you, Tate, but like, that like so since we're not shouting out people here, and because I don't want a bloodbath.
You have to choose dictate, please. I don't want it.
That's fine.
It's okay. I'm not gonna have a bloodbath on the or I will hope there will not be a bloodbath. I'm actually gonna shout out Corndog McGraw. I've actually only had a session 0 with her like on it was Wednesday. But just like the way that she set up the session 0, the way she like just I guess like earnestly talked about like, hey, what are we okay with right here, right? Like this is like, once again putting up like the red card, like, X's and O's, right? Are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? Just just all of that conversation on like hey, are we okay with and like the setting and everything. I think that was done really well. And I admire that as a really good session 0, and as a relatively new GM. That's me.
Yeah, awesome. Shout out Corndog, by the way. We love you a whole lot, girl. And I guess that's everybody, huh? I guess it's.
I don't think I actually answered the question. I shouted myself out and said my GM. I don't think I answered the question, but fair. Everybody else is giving really good answers, so I'm going to give a bad one. Be great, do crimes. K.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I agree with that sentiment entirely. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll just go ahead and send everybody home. Unfortunately, it's been the most amazing time. I don't want to end. I wish I could just come up with 8 more questions, just throw out at you guys right now, but Unfortunately, I was given rules and a time slot, so if I don't let you guys out of here now, Cole will yell at me. I'm already 20 minutes past time slot. He'll yell at me. It's fine. In any case, I've been Young Foxy. These have been my panelists. This has been Neon Lights Roleplay. If nothing else can be said, remember that, again, reality is a mirror through which we can view so many things. Fiction reflects the things that we see in our real lives, and the people you have at your tables, the people you have in your stories are real, and they have real things to say. Hear their stories, uphold those stories, and uplift those stories more than anything else. That, more than anything else, is your job as a game master, as a storyteller. That's the first thing and last thing you should be doing. Uplift your players, right? With that note, and with that message, I'm going to throw a quick on. No one I know is live. That's fine. It's okay. We're just gonna have to end stream then. It's okay.
Leslie Twisted is awesome, and we should go raid her.
Give me a name. Type it.
Where do I Discord typing things?
That sounds helpful. Cool. So we're gonna get a raid going. Oh right, you're right. Holy crap! Yeah, I got it. We're going to slide on over to Leslie Twisted, who is someone I've been following on Twitter for like years, and I'm a huge, massive fan of. She's playing Bloodborne, and it looks like it's going really well, really well. So go over there and send some live. Yo, she's at like, she's at 78 viewers. If we jump in there, we get to 100 even. Everyone go over there and say hi to her, please. Okay?
Yeah.
Like math.
You thought I wasn't going to bring fucking the Riders at Dawn through to Helm's Deep this Friday just because I wasn't streaming?
We're screaming death over the fucking mountain once we're coming over here, all right? It's serious over here. In any case...
Don't forget to come back to TPK Con.
Yes. Please come back to TPK Con for tomorrow. TPK Con has even more fun stuff going. If you want to catch vibes for TPK Con and want to see something else live, you can come back here and check us out live at 5 for Seven Suns. If you want to see some really fun things, my players might die. Anyway,
not a chance.
Just if you want any of that, and the next panel happening for TPK Con is actually in 40 minutes. I'm pretty sure it's actually Luca's random one shot, right? Is that 40 minutes? I'm pretty sure. In either case, please see TPK Roleplay because they're amazing. Thank them so much for giving us this spot to have this great time. Thank you to my panelists for giving me your thoughts and your time and your energy and for making this nightmare work. I love you all so very much. Thank you, my lovely chatters, for hanging and for talking to us and for giving us your thoughts as well and your energy and your love and your hype. You all are amazing. We will see you around. Take care. Be safe. Be good. And, I don't know, hug somebody, I guess, if you can. All right? Bye, babies.
Bye.
We're rating, I'm pretty sure.
Hey.
Are we not? Are we not rating? No, maybe we're not.
I don't know. I don't see anything going on.
For so long.
Oh, I got it. I'm picking it out.
Please.
I'm doing it.
There it goes.
And there it is.
Now it's over.
Bye, everybody.